Mr. Clerk, item 4, please.
Item number 4, resolution approving the award and execution of a $12.6 million four-year contract by the City and County of San Francisco through its Department of Elections to Sequoia Voting System Incorporated for the purchase of a new voting system and provisions of associated voting services.
Mr. Arntz.
Thank you, Supervisors. Good afternoon. John Arntz, Director of Elections. Today, the Department is putting forward this resolution seeking the approval of a contract with Sequoia Voting Systems, which is a 4-year contract with 2 one-year extensions at the option of the City. The total cost of the contract is $12.66 million. The purchase of the equipment represents about $8.5 million of that $12.66. In March of 2005, the Department issued a request for proposals for voting systems because the contract with the existing vendor, ES&S, was set to expire. There were 2 bids that were in response to the request for proposals. One was from ES&S and one was from Sequoia Voting Systems. The Sequoia Voting System bid received a higher rank from the panel than did the ES&S response. And the request for proposal required that the voting systems keep San Francisco as a paper-based city when it comes to voting. So the contract we have with Sequoia is essentially for a paper-based system with optical scan being the chief feature of the voting system, and then to provide accessible voting in the polling places for voters with disabilities. There would be one touchscreen unit in each polling place. One benefit from this contract as well is that voters would not see a different ballot in San Francisco. The same ballot that we've used for the past 7 years would continue here in the city for both the absentee voters as well as for the voters at the polling places. So if this contract is approved by the Board of Supervisors, then when the Department mails the absentee ballots to the voters for the February and June and succeeding elections in 2008, voters will see the exact same ballot card they've seen in the past 7 years. There will not be a change that will hit the voters as a sudden shift in how we conduct elections in San Francisco. Also, when the voters go to the polling places, they will see the same ballot card that they've seen for the past 7 years at the polling places as well. In fact, there will be less ballot cards at the polling places because now we have actually 2 versions of the ballot cards since we have the AutoMark ballots, which is the ES&S accessible equipment for people with disabilities. The AutoMark machines are not certified for use with our optical scan system, so we actually have to make a transition from the AutoMark ballot card into our present optical scan system. Voters won't see 2 ballots at the polls anymore. They'll see 1 ballot card, and it'll be the same ballot card that they've seen for the past 7 years, except for the AutoMark. The Sequoia contract requires the system to provide ranked choice voting elections in San Francisco starting in November 2008. Sequoia, as of August 22nd, has already placed an application with the Elections Assistance Commission seeking approval of its system to run ranked choice voting elections. I believe it's December 5th when Sequoia Voting Systems will come forward to the full board and provide a demonstration of its optical scan equipment as well as the touchscreen machine to show that they can actually record ranked choice votes. It won't be a full-blown demonstration. That would, I think, involve more machinery and more equipment. But at least they can demonstrate that the application that they put in with the federal government on August 22nd is able to record the ballot when people cast a ranked choice selection. Another key to this contract that's a protection for the city is if for some reason Sequoia were unable to get its system certified for ranked choice elections by November 2008, Sequoia is stipulated under the contractual agreement to develop an alternative plan of counting and reporting the votes from the ranked choice elections. And also not just develop an alternative plan, but also to pay the cost associated with that plan. For instance, let's say that we went into the November 2008 election and the ranked choice portion of the Sequoia voting system were not certified. All costs associated with counting and reporting the results for that ranked choice contest would be borne by the vendor. It's stipulated in the contract, and actually it has been stipulated in the contract since the end of 2006, I believe. This is not a new feature, but I think it's a relevant feature compared to what we're experiencing with the ESS system at the current time. Also, the Sequoia contract would require damages to be paid to the city for the amount of $175,000 if 10% of either the touchscreen machines or the optical scan equipment were not functioning at the polls on election day. That's been a challenge for the department in the past, is having all the equipment functioning at the polls. There's really never been a remedy that directly addressed the challenges the city faced in making sure that the equipment was functioning on election day. The Sequoia contract has it built in to where if the equipment doesn't work, if 10% of the equipment does not work at any point on election day, then the vendor owes us damages of $175,000 for the touchscreens and another $175,000 for the optical scan machines. So potentially, if there were a serious issue on election day, the vendor would be on the hook for $350,000 just because the machines weren't working at the polls. Another protection in the contract is that if 10% or more of the precincts were not reported by election night, then the contract would require damages paid to the city from Sequoia of $150,000. If the situation continued into noon of the next day, the amount of damages would increase to $200,000. If the situation occurred for a second day, then Sequoia would be on the hook for $400,000 of damages because we could not release the results from our election. Again, when you compare that or contrast that to the current situation, this contract provides concrete guarantees or protections to the city if the system does not work the way we expect it to work. If the system is not certified, if for whatever reason the system becomes uncertified, Sequoia would be required to provide an alternate method of counting and reporting results, and damages there could be up to $3 million depending on the situation in the first year of the contract, $2.5 million during the second year of the contract, and for $1 million in the third year of the contract. This resolution here is for the approval of the contract starting for the February 5th, 2008 election, which is very close, but also there are some milestones that are still contained within the contract, and if Sequoia were not to meet those milestones, there's a $1,000 a day damage payment that they would owe the city, and that would include $1,000 a day for not having the equipment delivered and installed in San Francisco by January 15th, 2008, and if they weren't to have the system tested for the election tested by January 24th, $1,000 a day would accumulate up to $100,000 total. For the first year of the contract, I believe the damage total is $4 million, liquidated damages that the city would be eligible for payment if Sequoia were not to perform, $3 million for one individual election. There's also a performance bond contained in this contract of $3 million for the first year, $1 million for the second year, and $500,000 thereafter. There are some new items in the contract from the last time this was visited at the committee. There were concerns about the ownership of Sequoia, that some chief executives of the company were residents of Venezuela. The company has been sold. Is actually a management purchase of the company. The management purchase has been done by people who are residents of the United States. All equipment that Sequoia will use in San Francisco will be manufactured in the United States. It will not be manufactured offshore, or there's no non-resident who was manufacturing equipment for Sequoia who is a part of the management team or an executive of the company. Another issue that came up from previous Budget and Finance Committee meetings were, are we stuck with this system? What would happen if there were a change down the road and San Francisco wanted to take advantage of those changes? There's a rebate process in the contract where there's a 20% depreciation of the worth of the equipment for 5 years under this contract. Eventually, it would be zero. So in 2 years' time, if there were significant changes or a change that San Francisco thought it wanted to pursue when it came to voting equipment, we would have a 60% full value of that equipment being returned to us from Sequoia to make the transition to the different system. And that was a significant concern, I believe, in February and March when we were here last time visiting this contract. Then the next big issue would be the open source disclosure of the code, software code of this voting system. Sequoia has agreed in the contract to adopt, of course, any change in state law regarding the source code of voting systems. If state law were to change to require the disclosure of the software code of a system or to provide reports, whatever the law might be, Sequoia, of course, is obligated to follow those changes, but has also contracted to follow those changes. Thus, since they're contracted, there will be damages paid to the city if they didn't follow state law in regards to the disclosure of open source. Further, any rule or regulation that's promulgated by the Secretary of State's office, Sequoia has contracted itself to follow regarding the disclosure of the source code or open source approaches to voting systems. So it doesn't take something as large as a change in state law for Sequoia to potentially disclose its software source code. It could be a rule or regulation that's promulgated at the administrative level by the Secretary of State's office. Another significant issue or item that's in this contract that was not a part of the contract the last time we were here was if any voting system in California is certified as an open source system or as a fully disclosed system, within 1 year's time, Sequoia has committed to either disclose its software and or submit an application to the federal government for a voting system that would fully disclose its software or be an open source software system. And that's a significant item. And that's something that will not be found in any contract anywhere else in the country. That's a significant agreement on Sequoia's part, and of course, since there are damages in the contract, they would have a financial hit if they weren't to follow that stipulated portion of the contract. Also, something that's continued since the last time we visited this idea is there will be, under the contract, there will be a third-party review of the software source code of the voting system. The city must identify and also bear the cost of identifying and contracting with an expert third party to review the source code of the voting system. Within a reasonable time, that third party will write a report of its findings and share that draft report with Sequoia and with the city, and Sequoia has 10 days to respond to that draft report. The third party expert has a choice to either contain any suggestions or explanations from Sequoia or not. Essentially, it's the third party's responsibility to provide an explanation or report on that software source code. But Sequoia, I think, as a matter of fairness, ought to be given a chance to respond to any draft report on a review of its software source code. Some language that's in the contract: if the final report discloses any material security deficiencies in the source code or any malicious code which would affect the operation of the software, the contractor shall take corrective action and shall bear all costs associated with correcting the material security deficiencies. So again, in the contract, if there is a third-party review that shows deep uncertainty about the operation of the software, the contract provides that Sequoia will undertake to remedy the situation at its own cost. And again, the way the contract is built, there are protections, there are liquidated damages that the city can apply to the situation if Sequoia does not follow through. And those are pretty much the significant aspects of the contract. And I think really at this point I can take questions and take it from there.
Questions from committee members. Supervisor Amiano.
Yeah, I mean, overall, and thank you, Mr. Rines, I think, and I'll ask some more details, but in general, I think the question is this Sequoia equipment ready or isn't it? And does the committee have the resources to service San Francisco needs? A lot of times these entities, promise the moon and then they don't deliver. And I know that you've been the guy in the middle and you've been doing an excellent job. But I do have a lot of concerns here. I've heard numerous dates for when we must decide on this contract in order. And if you hit on these things, I apologize, but I want to hear it again. For the record, what is the real deadline?
Well, the real deadline would be, I think it's December 5th or 11th is the deadline that Sequoia has in its mind for it to.
And can we get a demonstration?
Yeah, on December 5th, Sequoia will bring in its machines to demonstrate to the board.
It'll be a full demo?
That won't be a full demo. It'll be a partial demo before the board to show that the machines do function and can conduct a ranked choice or can record a ranked choice selection.
And then, so why can't we have a full demo on the 10th?
I'll let the Sequoia representative explain the reasoning behind why we can't get a full demo.
Yeah, because, if this contract means enough, and then it seems to me they could send an engineer to demonstrate the project. And, that's not towards you, but in the current reso, the language about total contract costs have been amended out, but there's a reference to HABA funds that could be put towards the cost of the machines, as well as an unspecified amount of Prop 41 money. So do we know how much Prop 41 money are we talking about exactly?
The Prop 41 and the HAVA money is about $6 million, so it's like 5.8, I think. That's what's in the resolution.
That'd be the total cost to the city independent of these subsidies? No.
No, so the city's cost would go beyond the 5.8.
Okay. When can we have a date, or do we have a certain timetable for full public disclosure of system technology and source codes? And when can we see in writing a plan for cleaning up all the documented design flaws which undermine the confidence? And can we make this happen before the next election, or will Sequoia wait until they're forced to do so by law, other than making a good faith gesture? And I know the Secretary of State probably is well intended, but she's really helped us create a mess. Unintended as it is, it's real for you, it's real for us.
One thing with the Secretary of State, by conducting the top-to-bottom review, there was a source code review. And if nothing else, even if people don't think that was a thorough enough review, that was a start to reviewing software source code. And Sequoia has to respond to that review. And I think then whatever review takes place in San Francisco would build on what happened at the Secretary of State's office. So instead of having a situation of first impression with the software source code as what the Secretary of State's reviewers experienced, the third-party experts that we would have to hire would be able to build on what happened, what preceded before San Francisco's reviewers began. And also, I think that whatever response that Sequoia provides the Secretary of State would also be something in hand that we could use.
Well, could we, as a possible scenario, just really push back at Secretary of State? I mean, we want to use the current equipment for one more election without all the conditions that she put on it, except maybe the one that requires the 10% post-election manual audit, rather than the 1%, that we feel that this is sufficient to ensure the integrity?
Oh, with the ESNS system?
Yeah, and that the reality is that it is sufficient. It seems that's one thing we could do, with all due respect, with a little more force, is really push back on this mess that I don't even think. I didn't think it was going to be this messy, frankly, and kind of tired of the media picking on the board and the committee for being responsible. You did a great job. We know who the mayor is. We know that Prop A passed. I think there was a lot of alarmist stuff in the press, and I think they've been proven wrong. I'm sure they're going to call up and apologize. But in the meantime, can we help you do that pushback with the Secretary of State?
Well, one thing that must take place still under the conditions that we're working under with the ESNS system is to provide a report or review of the conditions and how they impacted and potentially how effective they were in ensuring that the votes were counted correctly for this past election. The Secretary of State potentially could adjust its approach to setting conditions on the ESNS system. Certainly the department tried to change the conditions a bit so the burden wouldn't be as high as it ended up being. But
Yeah.
I think the Secretary of State's office at the same time has taken a strong position for reasons that it feels justified. And again, if the board wishes to move in a manner in response to a conversation with Secretary of State.
Yeah, I think some of the problem is that the Secretary of State has posited certain things, but I haven't seen any evidence to support the supposition. The whole thing about the ink being invisible, yet we have the black ink, and you know, between what the Eagle records and what you do here with the scan, I mean, I think it would show that that's really a minor problem, yet the Secretary of State makes it a bigger problem than I think it really is. But, you know, I mean, we could refute that. It's my idea. Maybe you can tell me different, but...
I mean, certainly the board can refute it, but still, under the conditions, as the department must follow the conditions to use the system. That's a little different stance.
Yeah, I guess what I'm suggesting that if we can find another way, either with a pushback or then you can give Sequoia more time to get their equipment ready. But right now, you know, we're not going to have a full demo. I heard they don't have a lot of engineers, and if you're going to have a size of this contract, I would expect that you would have enough engineers, or at least, you know, feel the importance of this issue to send an engineer. I mean, again, not directed towards you, but this is the uneasiness. You know, the thing is that the other option is so unattractive, you know, that this might smell better, but I don't think it's really going to do what we're asking. And I think, you know, it's clever to have the third party and all that, but, you know, things have to be public. They just can't be semi-public. That was the whole idea. So.
Supervisor, I think there's one thing that we need to make crystal clear, and that is that the Sequoia voting system is certified and can be used pursuant to federal and state certifications for February and June. It is the November of 08 ranked choice voting issue that has yet to be certified by the feds and the state. And the demonstration that we're talking about is a demonstration of ranked choice voting, not of the type of voting that will happen in February and June. So I just want to be very clear so that people in the public don't think that we're even discussing a system that does not have federal and state certification for all normal elections. It's just the ranked choice voting. And I think the issue that Supervisor Amiano is raising, which I don't think maybe Mr. Arntz, you're in a position to answer, and you deferred to the representative from Sequoia, is a very legitimate issue, which is, look, if we're to adopt this resolution, I believe the city attorney is going to tell us that the changes that you have just discussed and the changes in the resolution are significant and would require another hearing by this committee. This is the last committee meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee prior to the Thanksgiving break. So the next time that we could have this discussion would be on December the 5th at this committee. And the first time this could even go to the Board of Supervisors would be December the 11th. And so I am very interested in seeing whether or not Sequoia has the resources to have not a partial but a full demonstration prior to that full board meeting on the 11th.
It'd be good, and I think, I would require it, really. I mean, if it's this important, and to the company, then if they don't have the resources to prioritize, then I have concerns about that. And any documentation, too, going back to your point about the RCV, I understand that Sequoia has said that it's been submitted to a federal laboratory for testing and authorization, but having some written documentation, this is to Sequoia, would be preferable as well. I mean, I don't think anyone has actually verified that they've done so, and I guess it's just taken longer than anybody thought. And I think some verification, asking for that is justifiable on our part. Okay. I'd rather ask the hard questions now. Then get stuck later. Then, so.
Yeah, don't play catch up. I understand.
Yeah, and again, just so people aren't confused, I think you've really been a prince during this this whole mess, so thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Arntz. Before we hear from Mr. Bennett, I just want, and we still need to hear from the budget analysts and very patient members of the public and Commissioner Matthews. I do want to put this in a little bit of a kind of global American context relative to voting at the beginning of the 21st century in the wake of dimpled Chad, hanging Chad, debold. This is a period in voting technology that is a new frontier, and frankly, I don't really like the choices that we have to pick from. Nonetheless, we know what the ES&S experience has been, and I didn't ask Mr. Arntz to speak more to that, but suffice it to say that in the last 7 years that I've been on the Board of Supervisors, it has been less than a good experience with that vendor repeatedly, election in and election out. Secretary of State has been very clear with us relative to our current election scheme in San Francisco and the fact that it cannot persist. So we have a limited number of choices. I think there will be a day not too far from now when the entire election scheme has been rationalized throughout the land. But right now, we're left with a set of choices. They're not a set of choices that I particularly relish, but they are what they are, and we have to, deal with those. So, Mr. Bennett, why don't you come up? I certainly note the changes in the contract that Mr. Arntz has spoken to relative to the contractual requirement for Sequoia either to disclose the source code or retrofit for open source if and when that is the law or the rule. I note the third-party examination requirement. Why don't we talk about the ability for Sequoia to do a full ranked choice voting demonstration on or before December the 10th?
Very good. Stephen Bennett, Sequoia Voting Systems. Regarding a ranked choice voting demonstration, currently we are completing an election in November with our resources, not engineering, but resources that do operational work, including database work for such a event as doing a demonstration for ranked choice voting. Therefore, we have a couple issues. We have elections going on next week. We have elections going on in January, and of course, Super Tuesday. Therefore, it was in our best interest and time to do things right was to offer you two options. One is we offered a February 5th demonstration of the actual equipment that will show voters how to mark a ballot, which they currently do, sticking in the machine and having the machines record it. You'll also be able to view and test the touchscreen for audio voting for those people that choose to use that equipment. The full demonstration then we've asked for a February 12th, so it was after the election. So then I have staff, I have operations, I have people ready to go. So that was my offer to Mr. Arntz and to this board as a demonstration, a full-blown demonstration.
Well, one possibility is, if we are to move forward, would be council to revamp this resolution to withhold some amount of payment until after. Right now, the way, and I was going to introduce this, Ms. O'Leary, a clause that would withhold payment until the public demonstration on December the 5th, but perhaps we should withhold payment until February the 13th.
We'll agree to that.
Counselor?
Ann O'Leary, Deputy City Attorney. Yes, the contract can be changed to such that the agreement would be that no funds would be provided to Sequoia until Sequoia publicly demonstrated the capability of its voting system to record ballots cast in RCV elections. Per your request, I've prepared language in the resolution that would allow the resolution to reflect that agreement, and the agreement would be attached in the contract.
Mr. Bennett?
Supervisor Peskin, I would suggest that the cost of ranked choice voting to the city is $650,000. If you would withhold the $650,000 until, say, February 13th, when we prove and Mr. Orange approves the demonstration, as well as the, say, Mr. Hill, that would be acceptable in this contract to provide equipment to the city. We are still asking for money at signing of this contract.
Given that there's an election on
we're still
February
manufacturing
6th.
equipment.
Understood. All right, well, why don't we hold this issue in abeyance? Mr. Rose, you want to speak, or Ms. Newman, to your report?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Deborah Newman from the Budget Analyst's Office. Because we were not advised in sufficient time to prepare a revised report, our report to you today is the same as our prior report to you, which was issued when the competitive bid of Sequoia and ES&S was brought forward previously. As this item is going to be continued today, I believe, till the December 5th meeting, we will update our report to reflect the new situation as well as the proposed amendments going forward and come back to you at that time.
Thank you, Ms. Newman. Why don't we hear from members of the public? Thank you for your patience. I have a number of speaker cards. I don't know how many of these individuals are still here. Alan Deckert, Brent Turner, Tim Paulson, Rich Matthews. And I see Jane Morrison, and I don't have a speaker. Jane, I do have your speaker card. I've got it right here. First speaker. And if you want to line up, let me just read the rest of the names. Chandra Fries, Sasha Ilamorini, I'm sorry if I butchered that, Carol Bella, Dave Masson, Roger Donaldson, and last but not least, Jane Morrison.
I'm Alan Deckert, Open Voting Consortium. I want to address one thing, first of all. When you talk about the review by the expert, I really think that that's insignificant. This system has been reviewed by an army of scientists, UC scientists, under the direction of Deborah Bowen. And I want to read the very last concluding remarks of their report. It says, "We are regrettably unable to suggest any comprehensive strategy for mitigating the vulnerabilities in the Sequoia system that simultaneously provides a high assurance of security, maintains accessible DRE voting, and substantially incorporates existing hardware and software." In other words, there are a lot of problems that have been documented with this system. I do appreciate, I just saw the language minutes before regarding the conditional disclosure depending on another system being disclosed in California. But the bottom line here is you need a system that can withstand public scrutiny. This machine, as it exists right now, it doesn't fare very well under the scrutiny of scientists and engineers. And I also believe that I appreciate the limited choices that you have. I mean, ES&S is the biggest and best vendor in this land, and in your experience is that they're bad. But I think the Secretary of State's review is that they're all pretty bad. We have a broken system, and this is a calamity. I think that this is the context in which it should be viewed, as a calamity. I mean, if you had a bridge that fell down, you would not just wait for somebody to come up with a solution. You would take proactive action to correct the situation. And I think that that's what we're faced with here. I do believe if you put out a request for a bid that required full public disclosure, a system that can stand up to public scrutiny, you would get it. You would get it. This system is not ready for that. So I think you have more choices, and I recommend that you exercise those choices. I would also note that the language that I saw does not guarantee a date certain for public disclosure. It says that it would be within a year that they would apply to the federal government for certification. It doesn't say that they will get it. So I think that you should, at a minimum, require that they are going to get it if under that condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Decker. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Brent Turner. I'm an election rights activist. I also advocate for open source systems. I concur with Mr. Deckert's statements. I wanted to reiterate, as I've dropped off much material, that, and I have some more today, specifically from the San Francisco County Democratic Central Committee approving a resolution for open source, the Electronic Frontier Foundation advocating open source systems, the Zogby poll showing that 60% of people have heard news reports of flaws in electronic voting equipment, and 92% demand transparency in their election systems, a letter from John Edwards supporting open source systems, and numerous other pieces of paper. Just wanted to mention, when I keep hearing about liquidated damages, I own a green real estate company here in San Francisco, and we deal with liquidated damages clauses all the time. In my opinion, when you're talking about election system security, the fact that a company will go ahead and pay money if they screw it up, that really doesn't get me my comfort level. I appreciate liquidated damages provisions in real estate contracts, but when you're talking about elections and the protection of democracy, it really burns my hide to even hear it talked about in such casual, cavalier fashion. So I wanted to put that on the record as well. I also wanted to note that San Francisco is the home of the open source community. And I'm sorry, I left out, we're also endorsed by Tim Paulson of the San Francisco Labor Council. He demands transparency. The Labor Council demands transparency, similar to what Deborah Bowen campaigned upon. Mr. Deckert was quite involved with consulting Ms. Bowen during her campaign, and she certainly got my attention when she called for open source and transparency in elections. I saw Ms. Bowen the other night. She mentioned to me that she was glad to see that I'm still working hard on this issue. I expect that she is thinking that we're going to show leadership here on this particular issue. I know some have said that it may not be the Board of Soup's duty or issue, but I believe that it is, because the way that we're seeing the Microsoft lobbying efforts in the federal and state levels, we don't think we might be able to get resolved there. So the only place that it really comes down to, strangely enough, is San Francisco. So again, for San Francisco, I'm calling out for this board, this commission, to go ahead, stick with what you said before. Nothing has changed. If these people don't want to disclose their source code, then they can't have the contract. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Before the next speaker, I do want to indicate that we are in receipt of a letter from the Secretary of State dated November 14th, wherein she indicates that what we know to date, no open source voting system of any kind has been certified for use by the Federal Elections Assistance Commission, by my office, being the Secretary of State, or by any other Secretary of State's office in the country. That's unfortunate, because moving away from the current model that relies exclusively on proprietary software is important if we want to improve the transparency of our election systems, which in turn will build voter confidence in the electoral process. I believe it is highly unlikely that an open source system will be certified in time for the November 2008 presidential election. To my knowledge, no such product has been submitted to the EAC for review. The EAC review process is in its infancy, but based on prior reviews of systems conducted by the independent testing authorities, I would expect an examination of any system would take at least 6 months. Assuming a system is approved by the EAC, it would then have to be submitted to my office for review and testing, a process that is likely to take a minimum of 3 months. My office has not developed procedures to regulate open source software, and it is unclear what, if any, specific procedures would be necessary. Under current law, any voting system relying on open source software would need to be submitted to my office and subject to the same testing and review that is required for systems that rely on proprietary software. Just FYI. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Rich Matthews. I sit as an elections commissioner, but I'm here representing myself this afternoon. And thank you for bringing this issue forward, President Peskin. It's clear that we need a new system. We need something to help us tabulate our votes. And one of the things that I think gets lost in the occasionally dogmatic discussion of open source versus not open source and so on is this. There are kind of two flavors of voting systems. One is touchscreen, in which the same device both marks your ballot and counts it. And that creates a black box problem. People got a lot of problems with that. This county has never had that. Other counties that have had that have, in fact, had them cracked. And that is a horrible situation, and that is not going to occur here, and that is not the system that we're talking about here. We have a paper ballot system, and then we need some sort of a device to read the marks that voters make. Optical scan technology is ancient, and the fax was invented in World War II. So, and I mean that in a good way. Low tech sometimes is the best tech. So, you know, we have also built in by state law that after every single election, there is some percent. Now, state law says 1%. Currently, we are operating under Secretary of State guidelines requiring a 10-fold increase for those that were voted at the precinct, 25-fold increase of that those voted absentee. I don't have any particular opposition to increasing the manual hand count after elections from 1%. And other counties apparently have, in fact, done that. They've gone from 1% to 3% or 5% as a safeguard, and that's great. But I would encourage you to get the data from the last several elections in terms of what the manual tally has shown as compared to what the Eagle tape has shown on each machine. And they come out matching. Now, that's not accidental. Can the software be cracked that Sequoia is offering or that any other manufacturer would be offering? Yes, it can. You know, we still have to move forward. Can your bank and financial software be cracked? Yes, it can, but we still move forward because we have checks and balances on it. It's also interesting to note that a lot of the folks who are coming forward and who show up at Elections Commission meetings in opposition to this keep talking about other options, and yet don't quite state what they are. There's some theoretical options, but in terms of bringing something online after the June election, when the Secretary of State's conditional certification of our current equipment expires, we're kind of left with not much. We're pretty much, if this contract does not get approved, we're basically left with hand counting. And that's why machines were invented in the first place, because hand counting is not really reliable. In any system, the human error is the largest error. So we need to move on this now so that we have something in place that will guarantee a safe election. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Carol Bella, and I am with the San Francisco Voting Integrity Project. And I just want to take a quick moment to thank Supervisor Peskin and Mr. Noyola from your office and Zach from Supervisor Amiano's office for contacting me and your willingness to speak to me about this important issue. One of the main goals of the activist community, in my opinion, has been to stop San Francisco from signing a long-term contract with the existing voting machine companies, whether it be Sequoia, ES&S, Diebold, or Hart. I mean, we just don't believe that any of these companies are producing a product that is worthy of counting our votes, period. I mean, take, for example, Sequoia. They have had years to develop an RCV product, yet we're still talking about whether they're going to be able to demonstrate it to you so that we can sign this contract. And I think if you speak to the folks in Riverside County, they're booting Sequoia out of that county because they're having the same experience with Sequoia that we've had with the S&S for the last 7 years. So, I mean, in 5 years, we're going to be just as frustrated with Sequoia as we are today with the S&S. And then what are we going to do? Go contract with Diebold? I mean, I don't think San Francisco would ever allow that. So, with that being said, I mean, I have to say that I felt my perspective change a little bit on Election Day because I worked in Precinct 2101 in the Richmond district as an inspector, and I watched 95% of the RCV ballots being rejected by the Eagles, and I knew that those ballots were going to have to be remade by somebody at City Hall, and that's disturbing to me. And then in preparation for this hearing today, I spoke to several of you about why you're bringing the contract back before this committee. And the pragmatic side of me really understood the reasons for wanting to go forth with this contract, boot ES&S, get something new in here. And I started to feel this shift happening, which was very surprising to me, because I've worked very hard over the last 3 to 4 years on this project. And I had a call with several of my friends over the weekend, and we started talking about it, and I started saying maybe we need to do this Sequoia contract. I found myself actually stating the case for it, and I felt really uncomfortable doing that. And I had this come to Jesus moment when one of my colleagues, Chandra Fries, said to me, Carol, if you feel so awful about this, maybe it's not the right thing. And I mean, who is going to be the one that's going to draw the line in the sand? And so that's really the question that I want to leave with you today. I mean, I know I can't offer you an open source solution, and I can't tell you how we might hand count ballots or in the next 3 elections. And I don't know what words we should put in the contract so that this city will feel they're doing the right thing by giving this company $12 million. I honestly don't have a solution. But I just keep going back to that question. If San Francisco doesn't stand up to the voting machine companies today and say no more, who will?
Thank you, Ms. Bellott. Next speaker, please, Ms. Fries.
Thank you. Yes, Chandra Fries. I guess I'm Carol's inspiration here, so maybe you can tell which way I'm going to go with this. But first, I would like to say that the board has been subject to unfair and incorrect, incomplete media coverage of this issue because you've done the right thing in the past. And I would also like to start by saying we need to think about whether or not these are our only options. I would suggest that they're not our only options, because whether you're talking about ES&S or Sequoia, you are talking about, whether you're talking about an OptiScan or a touchscreen, it's still a black box. I was an inspector in polling place 2208, and when those people put in their ballots into the OptiScan machine, they didn't know what was going on that memory card. So whether we're talking ES&S or Sequoia, it's still a privately counted vote that citizens cannot oversee and cannot participate in the way those votes are counting. And if we go from ES&S to Sequoia, we're going from the frying pan into the next frying pan, and we need to do some due diligence on Sequoia. Ask Riverside County how they feel about Sequoia. Sequoia swore up and down, we have security in our machines. They're okay. They're doing it right. After Bowen's top-to-bottom review, she decertified them because they had not been representing that there's correctly the security involved in their machines. Dan Rather, you've got to watch Dan Rather's 30-minute expose on Sequoia. Sequoia, Dan Rather interviews on camera 7 employees from Sequoia who said they were shipping paper for ballots that did not pass the tests. We wouldn't sign off on the security, or we wouldn't sign off on the quality of this paper. There were photocopied seals on the paper stacks that they were sending out, and these were the hanging chads. And where did they send them? They sent them to Florida. This is a company that's misrepresenting what they're doing. They need to be checked out. Due diligence on this company has to be done. We do have another option, and it is counting our ballots as citizens. I have people coming out of my ears who are volunteering to hand count if we have to do it in February, June, and November, including the League of Women Voters. We don't want secret vote counting. We want a system that we can count on, that we can watch, that we can verify with our eyes and with our participation in our democracy. It's time to draw the line. We draw the line on FISA, we draw the line on illegal wiretapping, we draw the line on Ukasey appointments. It's time to draw the line on the way we count our votes. This is our democracy at stake, and we will participate to help that it's done right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reed.
Hi, my name is Sasha Almarini. I'm with the San Francisco Voting Integrity Project also. And since this is a Budget and Finance Committee, I want to start out by talking about the finances and comparing and contrasting this contract with our current situation. This is a $12.6 million contract over 4 years. That's over $3 million a year. Right now, our current elections are costing us a little over $1 million per election. Of course, Sequoia is willing to pay for any damages. We're paying them $2 million more than we're currently paying for an election. It's just not fiscally smart. I think we need to relook at those numbers. If we don't demand secure machines with full public disclosure of source code, we'll never get them. And I just think that it's up to San Francisco with our buying power to ask for what we truly need, to put out a new RFP for the machines that we want, and not use these machines that are already kind of out of date to move forward on this. As Chandra explained, hand counting is a viable option. I also want to read something from a friend, Roger Donaldson, who was not able to stay for 2.5 hours to speak. And I have his notes here. First, he'd like to say that no system available is certified by the California Secretary of State, and they're not good. Sequoia and the other are just as bad in the customer service, and they don't make us any better off. San Francisco is in a predicament. ES&S has a one-time certification. The alternatives appear only to be Sequoia or a hand count. But there is a third option. That is to seek to extend the ES&S contract and to work with the Secretary of State to develop a new system. HAVA allows us to use HAVA funds in this way, and the Secretary of State said that that's possible. And there are two options. Roger recommends that we seek the ES&S extension. Let's see. And if we don't use a hand count, we can still partnership and start to develop a new alternative. And second, if we have to go with Sequoia, to make sure that there's a resolution stating a preference for open source and disclosed source system. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, long afternoon for you. I'm Jane Morrison, and I'm sort of speaking on behalf of some of my friends who couldn't be here, who are very concerned about using a voting machine with a secret system. I respect the staff of the Elections Department. I've had very good work with them through the many years. I think we must consider counting the votes by hand. I suspect it'll be a good deal cheaper, and it also is more reliable, and we could, if there's any problem with the vote ties, remember we used to count them over. I remember the 1950s, the Department of Elections would have on election night a huge room with a desk, an adding machine, and a clerk for each candidate or issue. And they would pass the ballot from one desk to the next through the room, maybe 30 different desks or 25, depending on how many issues and candidates there were. And at 10:30 at night, we know who won. And there was no problem. The counting was considered good, but if it was a close race, they could easily count something again. So I think that we ought to seriously investigate counting by hand before we sign up for any machine that we have no confidence in. I think we all agree that voters are not like a box of strawberries where you can throw away those that are slightly damaged. And I know it's a very difficult question. We have to get the votes counted, but I would like to see us try a vote system. I don't remember when machines first appeared. I don't know if any of you know that. I'd like to know when we first started abandoning the hand counting system. But we had elections then, and it was very respected, and it came out very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Morrison. Next speaker, I have Dave Masson, Gerard Gleason, Charlie Marsteller, Scott, hard to say, and Danny Swordsman.
Good afternoon. Dave Masson, Democracy Action. Some of our members are out of town today, and I'll speak on behalf of our club. We feel that trustworthy elections are critical. We do a lot of voter registration, and we meet people who don't want to register because they are afraid that their votes are not going to count. We supported the board earlier this year in its decision to hold off on a contract with Sequoia because Sequoia had refused to publicly divulge their code. And we still feel that if electronic voting machines are deployed, their codes should be publicly disclosed, such as over the internet. And if that's not available, then we hand count ballots if that's what we have to do to make things work. Based on letters to the editor that I've seen in the Chronicle, it seemed to me that letters favoring the board's earlier decision outnumbered those that said, the board screwed up, and bemoaning not getting election results quite as quickly. So unless there's been some change in public opinion, it seems to me that the majority of San Franciscans understand this issue, and there's not a call for the board to change its earlier position. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Masson. Mr. Gleason, are there any other members of the public who would like to testify on this item? Please come forward.
Hello. Good afternoon. My name is Gerard Gleason. I'm a member of the Elections Commission, actually appointed by this body, but I'm here to speak as a voter. I also work in the precincts every election. I do want to say that, and I did submit comments last February to this committee, and I'll submit a copy again. I think I mailed one to you, Supervisor Peskin. I think you succinctly described the national situation that we're in. My feeling is I lukewarmly support this, but I think we need to move with all haste, because we actually dodged a bullet this last election with the number of remakes that we had. And I actually was flabbergasted that the Secretary of State would have us do wholesale remakes because we're duplicating ballots manually, particularly when there's nothing wrong with this. And I say this as somebody who actually did the remakes, and particularly because I have dyslexia. I mean, it's just unbelievable that they did this, because remakes should be done the same way a doctor performs surgery, selectively, not wholesale. So if this was Vallejo or San Bruno and the measures they had this election and the outcome of the election, we'd be in a big mess right now. So like I said, we just dodged a bullet on that. So like I said, for that reason, I think we need to move forward. We need a new voting system that's reliable. I do hope that the lifespan of this contract is very short, because the problem is, as Director Arndt said, we're essentially getting a paper-based system, but he's using the word essentially. We're introducing DREs, touchscreens, into the precincts. And as somebody who works in the precincts, I see people seeing the auto mark, which actually marks a ballot for somebody, but we're introducing a machine that marks and tabulates. And there are a number of people who need that assistance done, but they should have their ballot marked and tabulated the same way everybody else does. And the problem with the DREs in the precincts is, in short, they're going to be an attractive nuisance. There's already public comments about people misunderstanding the auto mark as a touchscreen, and they come in and we have open debates. I see this every election. So I think I'm surprised that, well, I mean, I understand why Sequoia came forward and presented the touchscreen as their alternative for the assisted voting device, but it's a cobbled together system. Even with the, the clunky paper screen on the side, it's as you said, Supervisor Peskin, it's part of the national problem. The choices really stink. We should take what we can get. We should really move on, and we really should jettison the DREs as soon as possible. That should be kept in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next speaker, please, Mr. Marsteller. And if there's anybody else after this speaker, please line up in the center aisle.
Yes, good afternoon again, Commissioners. I'm not Commissioners, I'm sorry, Supervisors. I had a comment of actually congratulations and thanks that I wanted to extend to the Commission, to the Department, and to Mr. Arntz for another happy and successful election cycle. And Election Day here in San Francisco, I think we did dodge a bullet, and I think they did so magnificently. I did have one comment, and that is I want to make sure that we know exactly who we're doing business with. There has been some indications that in this industry of changing corporate ownership, not that I have anything against corporate ownership or changes in dynamicism in corporations, but I do think that we want to make sure that we know who we're doing business with, that the warrants that they're making, the contracts that they're signing, the fines that they're possibly going to be liable for are a collectible or whatever, that we have a warranty assurance. And I think that, we don't want to find ourselves in the position of where our city attorney has to go chasing spirits and ghosts in making sure that these terms of these contracts are honored because of changes of corporate ownerships or other dodges that might come up if we have a disaster. I don't anticipate a disaster. I know the department and the Sequoia have been working very hard, very long to try to get a workable system. They are certified, so we're in good shape. But I just want to make sure that from a contractual point of view, we know who we're doing business with and that we have some degree of warranty assurance.
Next speaker.
My name is Danny Swordsman. I'm with Open Voting Solutions. I've been coming to these meetings. At first I was advocating using open source software, and I can see that there are obstacles to doing that. These are real obstacles. It costs money to develop software, and there's a certification process. These are obstacles which can be overcome. We have proposed to the Director of Elections, and we propose to you, that we can develop the software in time for 2008 November if the board were to act quickly on this. You can hire us or you can hire another software developer, but the city has within its power the capacity to actually solve this problem and solve it well and solve it in a way that other cities in this country haven't. You can invest the money. The money is small compared to $12 million. We're talking about a teeny fraction for the development of the software, the certification, and purchasing of all the equipment. This is the only solution that you can have that will solve the problem, solve it completely to the satisfaction of all your critics, and give the city of San Francisco a trustworthy voting system.
Hello, supervisors. My name is Scott Wiseman. I am been a citizen of San Francisco for 28 years. I speak as a citizen of San Francisco. I encourage you respectfully to not use these electronic systems. Besides Dan Rather's interviews, also Robert Kennedy Jr. wrote a scathing investigative article about Sequoia and Diebold, which was published about a year ago in Rolling Stone, basically exposing that they are unaccountable and potentially untrustworthy. I encourage a paper trail, and I encourage having the ability to know and have a full count. Thank you.
Hello, supervisors. My name is Ian Dedrick. I'm representing myself here. I just want to address a few issues. First one, we held an election, here 8 days ago, and had near record low turnout on that. And we still don't know the results because we didn't buy the new machines when we had a chance months ago. I feel this is pretty embarrassing because I'm fairly young and I'm dealing with a lot of the newer technology that's out. Another thing I have to say is, we have 3 elections coming up next year, and we don't have a system in place to handle them at this point. We will be the city, will we be the city that holds up the entire state's presidential primary results in February? I personally hope not. I feel like we should buy the machines the Secretary of State has certified, and let's buy them now as soon as possible. The other things I'd like to say is, the presidential election is coming up, and with more votes, there's more counting, and nobody knows however long that will take, possibly months after, we count these that we just voted for 8 days ago. And the other thing, with this, we also have humans voting error. Humans counting the votes as an error as well. So you basically have to either trust, electronic voting or human voting. They both have an error, And, it just goes to show that, machines, you just have to worry about the programming rather than the actual human counts. And if we have to bring in more humans to be able to count the votes for larger elections, that also requires, more error, because there's more humans, more error. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Error is human. All right. Any other speakers? Seeing none, we will close public comment. Councilor O'Leary, we have an amendment of the whole before us that refers to some of the contractual changes that Mr. Arndt spoke to, as well as an additional clause with regard to withholding money if Sequoia fails to do a full public demonstration on or before February 12. Would you like to speak to the amendment of the whole and that clause in particular?
Yes, Supervisor Peskin, the request is to ensure that not only a demonstration will take place, but a full demonstration will take place. So the change is to page 2, the second amended paragraph would now read, whereas to encourage voter confidence in the use of the Sequoia voting system in RCV elections, the agreement requires Sequoia to publicly, and then we would add, and fully, demonstrate the capability of its voting equipment to record ballots cast in RCV elections. And we would change the date to say by February 12th, 2008. The next sentence would read, if Sequoia fails to comply with this requirement, the agreement allows the city to withhold, and in it, we would add the $650,000 payment that will be provided to Sequoia for the RCV application. Strike out payment to Sequoia and say until such demonstration has been conducted. This language will ensure that a full and complete demonstration is provided and will ensure that Sequoia has not provided any monies for RCV elections until that full and complete demonstration is completed.
And Ms. O'Leary, one of the speakers spoke to the question of Sequoia's ability to perform and warrant. Would you like to address the contractual provisions for that?
Yes, there's a surety bond in this contract of $3 million in the first year. It goes down to $2 million and then $1 million, but it's a bond that has to be set aside so that if there is a non-performance issue, we do have that bond in place. Furthermore, there's assurances in the contract that the city would have to approve any successor, working with any successor to this contract.
And successor includes changes in the corporate structure. I mean, if they were to transfer the corporate entity to another entity and keep it as a wholly owned subsidiary, would it cover that?
That is my understanding, and I will ensure that as we go back and review the contract, we'll ensure that that is the case.
Supervisor Amiano?
I just wanted to say we do have some challenges. Hopefully they will not be insurmountable, and I just want to repeat that the question really is Sequoia equipment ready or isn't it, and does the company have the resources to service San Francisco and its needs? And we'll find out at the subsequent hearing. Sure.
So why don't we adopt the amendment of the whole as further amended orally by, as stated by council? And can we do that, colleagues, without objection, and then continue the item as amended to the next hearing of the Budget and Finance Committee on December the 5th? Without objection, that will be the order, and the Budget and Finance Committee is adjourned.
Well, we have to do.
I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry. I forgot about that. The Budget and Finance Committee is not adjourned.